In June 2018, the Martin family, John, Emily, and their two kids, Sarah and Jason, packed up their car and headed to one of the most beautiful places in America, Yellowstone National Park, a place where families go to disconnect from the world and reconnect with nature, where the air is fresh, the skies are endless, and the wilderness stretches out like a canvas of pure, untouched beauty. They were excited. This was supposed to be their adventure, a week away from phones, away from screens, away from the noise of everyday life. Just the four of them, a tent, and the great outdoors. But they never came back. When their tent was found 5 years later, still standing in that remote corner of the park, everything they'd brought with them was still inside. Their clothes, their gear, their personal belongings. But no sign of the Martins, no bodies, no clues, no answers. Just gone. What happened to them? That's the question that's haunted investigators, search teams, and their family ever since that summer day in 2018. And here's the thing. This isn't just a story about a family that disappeared. This is a mystery that challenges everything we think we know about safety, about the wilderness, and about the fragility of the line between a perfect vacation and a complete nightmare. Because when you hear what was found at that campsite 5 years later, when you learn about the strange details that emerged, the odd markings, the footprints leading nowhere, you'll start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's more to this story than anyone wants to admit. So if you're ready to dive into one of the most baffling disappearances in recent history, hit that subscribe button right now, because you won't want to miss what happens next. And trust me, this story is going to stay with you long after this video ends. Let me take you back to June 12th, 2018. The Martins lived in a quiet suburb of Denver, Colorado. John Martin was a high school history teacher, the kind of guy everyone liked, the kind of teacher students remembered years after graduation. He had this way of making history come alive, of making you care about events that happened centuries ago. His wife, Emily, was a nurse at a children's hospital. She was gentle, compassionate, the kind of person who chose a career based purely on wanting to help others. Their daughter, Sarah, was 16 at the time, smart, artistic, always sketching in her notebooks during family dinners. And their son, Jason, was 12, energetic, curious, obsessed with nature documentaries and wildlife. He'd been begging his parents for years to take a real camping trip, not just a night in the backyard or a weekend at a state park with bathrooms and Wi-Fi. He wanted the real deal, the wilderness. So when John suggested Yellowstone that summer, Jason's face lit up like it was Christmas morning. Sarah was less enthusiastic at first. She was at that age where hanging out with your parents isn't exactly the coolest thing in the world. But even she warmed up to the idea. A week unplugged, a week exploring, a week just being together. Emily packed their bags with the care and precision of someone who'd planned 1,000 family trips before. First aid kit, extra batteries, warm clothes for the cold mountain nights, enough food to last them well beyond the week they'd planned to stay. John spent hours researching the best trails, the safest campsites, the spots where they could see wildlife without getting too close. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't careless. He was a father who wanted to give his kids an experience they'd never forget. And that's exactly what he did, though not in the way he imagined. On June 12th, they loaded up their SUV and drove north. It was a long drive, over 8 hours, but they didn't mind. They played road trip games, listened to music, stopped at diners along the way. Jason kept talking about the animals he hoped to see. Bears, elk, maybe even a wolf if they were lucky. Sarah took photos out the window, capturing the changing landscape as they drove deeper into the mountains. Emily sat in the passenger seat, reading aloud from a guidebook about the park's history, its geysers, its ecosystems. John drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding Emily's hand, glancing back every now and then at his kids in the rearview mirror. This was what life was supposed to be about. Moments like these. When they arrived at Yellowstone, the sun was just starting to set, casting the entire park in this warm, golden light. They checked in at the ranger station, got their permits, picked up a map, and headed out to their campsite. It was remote. John had chosen it specifically because it was away from the crowded tourist spots. No RVs, no big groups, just them and the wilderness. They set up their tent as the last light faded from the sky. Jason helped his dad hammer in the stakes. Sarah and Emily unpacked the sleeping bags and organized their gear. They built a small fire, roasted marshmallows, told stories. Jason fell asleep under the stars, his head resting on his dad's shoulder. Sarah sketched the firelight dancing on the trees. Emily leaned against John, breathing in the cool mountain air, feeling, for the first time in months, completely at peace. It was perfect. And that night, as they all crawled into the tent and zipped it shut, none of them could have known it would be the last normal night they'd ever have. The next morning, June 13th, they woke early. The plan was simple: hike a nearby trail, have lunch by a stream, then come back to camp and relax. They left most of their gear at the campsite. No need to carry everything when they'd be back in a few hours. John had the map. Emily had the first aid kit. Sarah had her sketchbook. Jason had his binoculars. They set off just after sunrise, the air still cool, the forest quiet except for the sounds of birds and the distant rush of water. According to the trail map, the hike was moderate, about 6 miles round trip, mostly flat with a few uphill sections. Nothing they couldn't handle. But here's where things start to get strange. Because after that morning, no one ever saw the Martins again. Not on the trail, not at their campsite, not anywhere in the park. They simply vanished. It wasn't until June 15th, 2 days later, that anyone realized something was wrong. The Martins were supposed to check out that morning, return their permits, and head home. When they didn't show up, a ranger drove out to their campsite to check on them. What he found stopped him cold. The tent was still there, fully intact. The flap zipped shut from the inside. Their car was parked exactly where they'd left it. Inside the tent, everything was laid out neatly: sleeping bags, clothes, personal items, even Emily's purse with her wallet and phone still inside. The fire pit had cold ashes from a fire that had burned out days ago. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no indication that anything violent had happened. It looked like the Martins had just stepped away, like they'd be back any minute, but they never came back. The ranger immediately radioed for help, and within hours, a full-scale search operation was underway. Park rangers, local law enforcement, search and rescue teams, everyone mobilized to find this missing family. They searched the trails. They searched the surrounding forest. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, drones. They covered every inch of that area, calling out their names, looking for any sign, footprints, discarded items, anything. But they found nothing. It was as if the Martins had been erased from existence. Now you're probably thinking, okay, they got lost. They wandered off the trail and couldn't find their way back. It happens, right? People get disoriented in the wilderness all the time. But here's the thing: John Martin wasn't inexperienced. He'd been camping dozens of times. He knew how to read a map, how to use a compass. And even if they did get lost, they had supplies. They had water. They had a first aid kit. Why wouldn't they stay put and wait for rescuers? Why wouldn't they try to signal for help? And more importantly, why would all 4 of them vanish without leaving any trace? No footprints leading away from the campsite, no dropped items, no signs of panic or distress. If they'd been attacked by an animal, there would have been evidence: torn clothing, blood, tracks. If they'd fallen into a ravine or a river, search teams would have found something. But there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. As the days turned into weeks, the search continued. But hope began to fade. Investigators interviewed everyone who'd been in the park that week: other campers, hikers, park staff. No one had seen the Martins after the morning of June 13th. It was like they'd walked into the forest and simply ceased to exist. The Martin family's disappearance made national news. Their faces were plastered on every news station, every website, every social media platform. Emily's sister set up a Facebook page dedicated to finding them, posting updates, organizing volunteer search parties. Thousands of people shared the posts. Hundreds of volunteers showed up to help search. But despite all the attention, all the manpower, all the resources thrown at this case, there were no answers. Theories started to emerge, of course. Some people thought they'd been abducted, maybe by a stranger, maybe by someone they'd encountered on the trail. Others believed they'd gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. Their bodies hidden somewhere deep in the wilderness where searchers couldn't find them. A few people even suggested something more sinister, that maybe John had planned this, that maybe he'd wanted to disappear and take his family with him. But anyone who knew John dismissed that immediately. He wasn't that kind of person. He loved his family. He loved his life. There was no reason for him to run, no reason to vanish. And yet, he had. They all had. By August 2018, the official search was called off. The park rangers had done everything they could. The police had followed every lead. The volunteers had searched every accessible area. There was nothing more to be done. The case was classified as a cold case, unsolved, unexplained, and unlikely to ever be resolved. Emily's sister refused to give up. She kept the Facebook page active, kept posting updates, kept hoping that someday, somehow, someone would find something. But as the months turned into years, even she started to lose hope. The Martins became just another tragic statistic, another family lost to the wilderness, another mystery that would probably never be solved. Their house in Denver sat empty, exactly as they'd left it. Sarah's art supplies still on her desk, Jason's nature books still on his shelf, Emily's coffee mug still in the sink, frozen in time, waiting for a family that would never come home. And for 5 years, that's where the story ended. Until August 2023. 5 years after the Martins disappeared, a hiker named Daniel Ortiz was exploring a remote section of Yellowstone, far off the main trails, deep into an area most visitors never see. Daniel was an experienced outdoorsman. He'd been hiking these mountains for over a decade, always looking for new trails, new views, new adventures. On August 12, 2023, he stumbled across something he wasn't expecting. A campsite, old, weathered, overgrown with vegetation. At first, he almost walked right past it. It blended into the forest so well that if he hadn't been paying close attention, he would have missed it entirely. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the light hit the faded fabric of the tent. Maybe it was the unnatural shapes hidden beneath the vines and moss. He stepped closer. The tent was still standing, barely. The fabric was torn in places, discolored by years of rain and sun, but it was structurally intact. Vines had grown up the ceiling. Moss covered the base. Leaves and dirt had piled up around the entrance. Daniel's heart started to race. He pulled out his phone, tried to get a signal. Nothing. He was too deep in the wilderness. He approached the tent slowly, carefully, not sure what he was going to find. He unzipped the entrance. The zipper still worked, surprisingly, and looked inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Inside the tent, everything was still there. Sleeping bags, laid out neatly as if the occupants had just woken up and stepped outside for breakfast. Backpacks, still packed with clothes and supplies. A small camping stove, a lantern, a first aid kit. Personal items, a wallet, a hairbrush, a child's stuffed animal. And in the corner, covered in a layer of dust and mildew, a sketchbook. Daniel picked it up carefully, opened it. The pages were filled with drawings, landscapes, trees, animals, and on the inside cover, written in neat handwriting, Sarah Martin. Daniel stumbled backward, his hands shaking. He knew that name. Everyone who'd followed the case knew that name. This was the Martins' campsite. After 5 years, someone had finally found it. But where were they? Daniel didn't touch anything else. He backed out of the tent, marked the location on his GPS, and hiked as fast as he could back to the nearest ranger station. Within hours, the site was swarming with investigators. The tent was photographed, documented, carefully searched for any clues that might explain what had happened. Everything inside was cataloged, every piece of clothing, every personal item, every scrap of paper. And that's when they found something that changed everything. Footprints. Faint, barely visible after 5 years of weather and erosion, but unmistakable. Leading away from the campsite deeper into the forest. Not just one set of footprints, multiple sets. 4, to be exact. 2 larger prints, likely John and Emily. 2 smaller prints, likely Sarah and Jason. They were walking in a single file line, deliberate, purposeful, not running, not panicking, just walking, away from their tent, away from their supplies, away from safety. But why? The discovery of the footprints reignited the investigation. Forensic teams were brought in to analyze the prints, to try to determine how old they were, which direction they were heading. Search dogs were brought back to the area, hoping they might pick up a scent after all these years. News crews descended on Yellowstone once again, and the Martin family's story was back in the headlines. But despite the renewed effort, despite the new evidence, the answers remained elusive. The footprints led about half a mile into the forest before they simply stopped. Not because they reached a river or a rocky area where tracks wouldn't show. They just stopped. In the middle of the forest, on soft ground where footprints should have continued, they ended, as if the Martins had been lifted into the air, or had simply ceased to exist. Investigators started searching the area around where the footprints ended, and that's when they found the markings. Carved into the bark of several trees, at roughly chest height, were strange symbols, not random scratches made by animals, not natural patterns in the bark. These were deliberate, precise, intentional. Symbols that looked almost like letters, but not from any alphabet anyone recognized. Circular patterns, angular lines, dots arranged in specific formations. Some of them looked fresh, well, relatively fresh, maybe a few years old. Others looked older, weathered, almost grown over by the tree's natural healing process. Forensic analysts took photos, made rubbings, tried to determine what tools had been used to make them. The cuts were clean, made with something sharp, a knife most likely. But why? Why would the Martins, or anyone, carve these symbols into trees in the middle of nowhere? What did they mean? The discovery of the symbols sent the investigation in a completely new direction. Linguists were brought in to analyze them, to see if they matched any known language or code. Anthropologists were consulted to determine if they had any historical or cultural significance. But no one could make sense of them. They didn't match any Native American symbols from the region. They didn't match any known alphabet or cipher. They were completely unique. One investigator suggested they might be some kind of marker, a way for the Martins to leave a trail to help rescuers find them. But if that was the shape, I said, why use symbols no one would understand? Why not carve arrows or their initials or the word help? Another investigator proposed a darker theory, that maybe the Martins hadn't carved these symbols at all. Maybe someone else had, someone who'd been in the forest, someone who'd encountered the family. But that raised even more questions. Who? Why? And where were the Martins now? And the investigation continued. More details started to emerge. The tent had been zipped shut from the inside, meaning whoever left had deliberately closed it behind them. The supplies inside were neatly organized, not ransacked or disturbed. There were no signs of a struggle inside the tent, no blood, no torn fabric. Everything suggested the Martins had left voluntarily. But why would they leave all their supplies behind? Why would they walk into the forest with nothing, no food, no water, no gear? It didn't make sense unless they were running from something or following something. Let me pause here for a second and ask you something. What would you do in this situation? If you were camping with your family, safe in your tent, all your supplies around you, what would make you leave? What would make you walk away from safety, from food, from shelter, and head into the wilderness with nothing? It would have to be something urgent, right? Something terrifying. Something that made staying put feel more dangerous than leaving. Or maybe something compelling, something that promised safety or rescue or help. But what? That's the question investigators couldn't answer. What could have convinced all four members of the Martin family to abandon their camp and walk into the forest? If you're as hooked on this mystery as I am, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Every like helps us reach more people. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there has information that could help solve this case. In September 2023, investigators decided to expand their search even further. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, hoping to find any evidence that might be buried beneath years of dirt and vegetation. They searched caves, ravines, any place where bodies or evidence might have ended up. They re-interviewed everyone who'd been in the park during June 2018, hoping someone might remember something new, some detail they'd overlooked before. And slowly, a few new pieces of information started to surface. A couple who'd been camping about 2 miles from the Martin site remembered seeing a man near the trail on June 13th. They didn't think much of it at the time. Lots of people hike Yellowstone, but they remembered him because of how he was dressed. He wasn't wearing typical hiking gear. He was dressed in dark, heavy clothing, unusual for a warm June day. And he was just standing there off to the side of the trail, watching people pass. Not hiking, not resting, just watching. The couple said they felt uncomfortable, so they hurried past him and didn't look back. They never reported it because, at the time, it didn't seem significant. But now, 5 years later, with the Martins' campsite discovered and the investigation reopened, they came forward. Could this man have had something to do with the family's disappearance? Investigators tried to track down this mystery man, but with so little information, no name, no photo, just a vague description, it was nearly impossible. They created a composite sketch based on the couple's description and released it to the public, hoping someone might recognize him. Tips started pouring in. Some people claimed to have seen someone matching the description in other parts of the park. Others said they'd seen similar individuals in different national parks across the country, but none of the leads went anywhere. Without concrete evidence linking this person to the Martins, there was nothing investigators could do. In October 2023, another hiker came forward with information. A woman named Rebecca Torres said she'd been hiking near the Martins campsite on the evening of June 13th, the day the family was last seen. She remembered hearing voices in the distance, a man, a woman, and what sounded like children. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone didn't sound distressed. It sounded normal, like a family having a conversation. She didn't think anything of it at the time, but now looking back, she wondered if it had been the Martins. Investigators asked her if she remembered anything else, any other sounds, anything unusual. Rebecca hesitated, then said there was one thing. After the voices faded, she heard something else, a sound she couldn't quite identify. It was low, rhythmic, almost like chanting. She thought it was strange, but she was tired and it was getting dark, so she hurried back to her own campsite and didn't investigate. Now she couldn't stop thinking about it. What if that sound had something to do with the Martins' disappearance? Chanting. That detail sent a chill through the investigation team because it raised the possibility that the Martins hadn't just gotten lost or encountered a dangerous animal. It raised the possibility that they'd encountered someone who'd been in the forest, someone who might have had bad intentions, or someone who'd convinced them to follow. But who and why? As the investigation dragged on into November 2023, the media attention started to fade again. People moved on to other stories, other mysteries, but Emily's sister, Jennifer, refused to let the case go cold again. She organized a press conference, pleading with the public to come forward with any information, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. She stood in front of the cameras, her voice shaking with emotion, and said, "My sister and her family deserve answers. Their children deserve to be found. Please, if you know anything at all, come forward. Help us bring them home." It was heartbreaking to watch. Jennifer had spent 5 years holding on to hope, refusing to believe her sister was gone. And now, even with the campsite discovered, even with new evidence, she still didn't have answers. She still didn't know what had happened to the people she loved. In December 2023, someone finally came forward. A man named Carl Jennings, a local who lived near the park, contacted investigators with information he said he'd been too scared to share before. Carl claimed that on the night of June 13th, 2018, he'd been driving on a remote access road near the park when he saw something strange. A group of people, 4 of them, he thought, walking along the side of the road. It was late, well past midnight, and they weren't carrying flashlights or any gear. They were just walking, single file in the same direction, like they were in a trance. Carl slowed down, thinking maybe they needed help, but something about the way they were moving made him uneasy. He said it looked off, unnatural, so he kept driving. He didn't stop. He didn't call anyone. He just went home and tried to forget about it. But when he saw the news about the Martins' campsite being discovered, when he saw their photos, he realized with horror that the people he'd seen that night might have been them. Investigators pressed Carl for more details. What time was it? What did they look like? Which direction were they heading? Carl said it was around 1 a.m., maybe later. He couldn't see their faces clearly in the dark, but the sizes matched. 2 adults, 2 kids. They were heading north, away from the main campgrounds, deeper into the wilderness. He didn't see anyone else with them. No one leading them, no one following, just the 4 of them, walking in a straight line, silent and mechanical. Carl said he had replayed that night in his head 1,000 times since then, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been terribly wrong. But by the time he realized it might be connected to the Martins, years had passed, and he didn't think anyone would believe him. Carl's testimony was a bombshell. If what he said was true, it meant the Martins had left their campsite in the middle of the night and walked miles through the forest to reach that access road. But why? Where were they going? And why did Carl describe them as moving like they were in a trance? Investigators searched the area around the access road, hoping to find more footprints, more evidence, anything that might confirm Carl's story. They found tire tracks, old, faded, but still visible in the dirt. Someone had been there. Recently enough that the tracks hadn't completely eroded. But whose vehicle? And where had they gone? As the investigation continued, more and more questions piled up, each one more unsettling than the last. Why would the Martins leave their tent in the middle of the night? Why would they walk for miles through the forest without any supplies, without any light? What were those symbols carved into the trees? Who was the man the couple saw on the trail? What was the chanting Rebecca heard? And most importantly, where were the Martins now? By January 2024, investigators had exhausted nearly every lead. They'd searched hundreds of square miles of wilderness. They'd interviewed dozens of witnesses. They'd analyzed every piece of evidence they could find. And yet, they were no closer to finding the Martin family than they'd been 5 years ago. The case remained open, but without new evidence, there was nowhere left to go. The footprints led nowhere. The symbols meant nothing. The witnesses had provided fragments of a story that didn't make sense. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. In February 2024, the case was officially reclassified. Not as a missing persons case, not as a cold case, but as an unexplained disappearance. A category reserved for cases that defy logical explanation, cases where the evidence doesn't add up, cases that might never be solved. The Martins joined a small, haunting list of people who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. But here's what we do know. We know the Martins were a loving family who went on a camping trip and never came home. We know they left their campsite willingly, walking in a straight line into the forest. We know someone or something carved strange symbols into the trees nearby. We know at least one witness saw them walking along a remote road in the middle of the night, moving like they were in a trance. And we know that despite 5 years of searching, despite all the resources, all the manpower, all the dedication of investigators and volunteers, no one has ever found them. So what happened to the Martins? I don't have an answer. I wish I did. But what I can tell you is this: their story is a reminder that the wilderness is vast, unpredictable, and often unforgiving. A reminder that even the most prepared, most careful people can find themselves in situations they never imagined. A reminder that sometimes, no matter how hard we search, no matter how desperately we want answers, we don't get them. And that brings me to the lessons we can take from this tragedy. Because while we may never know what happened to the Martins, we can use their story to protect ourselves and the people we love. So here are 5 critical lessons, practical, actionable steps you can take to stay safe when you are in the wilderness. Lesson 1, always tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. The Martins checked in at the ranger station, which was good, but they didn't give a detailed itinerary to anyone outside the park. No one knew exactly where their campsite was. No one knew which trails they planned to hike. If something had happened to them on day 1, it would have been days before anyone even noticed they were missing. So here's what you do. Before you leave for any trip, especially one in a remote area, Give a trusted friend or family member a detailed plan. Tell them exactly where you're going, what trails you'll be hiking, when you expect to be back. And if you don't check in by a specific time, make sure they know to contact authorities immediately. This simple step can be the difference between a quick rescue and a tragedy. Lesson 2. Bring communication devices and backups. The Martins had cell phones, but they left them in the tent. Even if they'd brought them, cell service in remote parts of Yellowstone is non-existent. That's why you need backup communication. Invest in a satellite phone or a personal locator beacon, a PLB. These devices work anywhere in the world, even in areas with no cell service. If you're in trouble, you press a button, and emergency services get your exact location. It's a small investment that could save your life. Lesson 3. Never leave your supplies behind. This is one of the most baffling aspects of the Martin case. They left their tent with all their food, water, and gear inside. Even if they were following someone they thought could help them, even if they believed they'd be back soon, they should have grabbed essentials. A water bottle, a flashlight, a first aid kit. Here's the rule. If you're leaving your campsite for any reason, even just for a short walk, bring the basics. You never know what might happen. You never know if that short walk will turn into an emergency. Lesson 4. Trust your instincts. Several witnesses in this case reported feeling uneasy. The couple who saw the man on the trail, Carl who saw the family walking at night. They all felt something was off, but they didn't act on it. If you're in the wilderness and something feels wrong, if you see someone behaving strangely, if you hear something unusual, if you just have that gut feeling that something's not right, listen to it. Get to safety. Contact authorities. Don't ignore it. Your instincts exist for a reason. They're your brain's way of detecting danger before you consciously recognize it. Trust them. Lesson 5. Stay together. If the Martins encountered someone dangerous, if they were led away from their camp under false pretenses, their best chance of survival would have been to stay together. And from what we know, they did. But here's the point. In an emergency, families need to have a plan. If you get separated, where do you meet? If something happens, what's the protocol? Talk about these things before you go on a trip. Make sure everyone knows what to do. Because in a crisis, people panic. And panic leads to mistakes. Having a plan, even a simple one, can keep your family safe. These 5 lessons won't guarantee your safety. Nothing can. But they significantly improve your chances. And they honor the memory of families like the Martins, who ventured into the wilderness with hope and excitement, only to become a cautionary tale. The Martin family's disappearance is a mystery that may never be solved. But their story doesn't have to be in vain. We can learn from it. We can prepare better. We can protect the people we love. So let me ask you, what do you think happened to the Martins? Do you think they encountered someone dangerous? Do you think they got lost and succumbed to the elements? Or do you think there's something stranger at play, something we can't explain? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and I replied to as many as I can. And if you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as I did, please share this video. Share it with your friends, your family, anyone who loves true crime or unsolved mysteries. The more people who know the Martin story, the greater the chance that someone somewhere might have information that could finally bring answers to their family. Thank you for watching. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries, true crime cases, and stories that will keep you up at night. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. And if you want to support the channel, give this video a like. It helps more than you know. Before you go, I want to leave you with one final thought. The wilderness is beautiful. It's awe-inspiring. It's one of the few places left where we can truly disconnect and find peace. But it's also powerful. It's unpredictable, and it doesn't forgive mistakes. The Martins went into Yellowstone looking for an adventure, and they found one, just not the one they expected. So the next time you head into the wild, remember their story. Prepare, stay alert, protect your family, and never, ever take nature for granted. Thank you again for watching. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.